And closing opposition, this first box to cats. My name is Ernest. I'm very honored to be chairing this grand finals. Can I have my panelists introduce themselves, preferably in accordance to the order that's listed out on tab? So we'll start with James.
Oh, James, pronouns out.
Hello, I'm Kugan.
Hi, I'm Mazi. Good luck for the round.
Hi everyone, Ritul. I go by he, him. All the very best. Thank you.
Hey guys, I'm Sneha. I do not have any preferred gender pronouns. All the best for.
Hi guys, Tanya here. My preferred pronouns are she and her. Best of luck, everyone.
All right, thank you very much to all panelists. I prefer he, they pronouns, but I prefer if all speakers address the panel as a whole. So just a few house rules before I begin. I believe we have a lot of members in the audience, so please remember to mute your mics at all times so you guys don't interrupt the flow of speeches. Secondly, for debaters, do indicate your preferred method of receiving POIs before you start your speeches. And finally, speeches are 7 minutes long. I will keep time, but please also keep time yourselves so you guys know how far along you are in your speeches. With all that said, I think we're good to go. I wish all teams the best of luck. And on the motion, this House opposes the creation of the Victoria Collective. I call upon the Prime Minister to open today's debate. Hear, hear.
Hi, can I be heard?
Yep, loud and clear.
Great, okay, I'll take POIs in the chat. Four things in this speech. Firstly, some setup. Secondly, why is this Victoria's Secret version of feminism particularly harmful? Thirdly, why is this bad for the feminist movement in general? And finally, why does this allow Victoria's Secret to feminist wash all of the actions they undertake? So firstly, four main things in setup. Firstly, it is clear, it is important to note that this is a branding exercise and an action of performative activism. Victoria's Secret has got a lot of backlash over the years for their Victoria's Secret Angels program, which essentially involved size 0 skinny white girls walking all their runways. This is their response to that. They are not interested in actual feminism, actually uplifting women. They've got backlash, they've lost sales, they want to do something differently in 2021. Secondly, in setup, there's a financial issue here in terms of people wasting money on a Victoria's Secret charity, where a lot of the money that goes into that charity then has to be funneled into things like marketing for campaigns and corporate bonuses. Well, this money could just be used on established charities that are already doing great work, they're run by people who are actually scientific experts and feminists and not simply in it for the money. Thirdly, it is important to note, and this is quite key, that feminism has limited social capital. That is to say that obviously there is a finite amount of time in which people can be interviewed and feminism can be talked about in the international sphere. If it takes a place, if they are the person being called up to the table, being interviewed, being asked about their opinion on feminism, this is incredibly harmful. Note, therefore, that the opposition has to prove not only that Victoria's Secret is a good actor, but why they are better than the average feminist. Why ought they have this place at the expense of other actual academic feminists, social feminists, etc. And finally, it's important to notice this collective will be controlled as secret, aka rich old white men who will be deciding what the collective can say, how they will be dressing, what they will be wearing, what they are going to be saying about feminism to the public. This is another thing that is incredibly important in this debate. Okay. First point of substantive. Why is this Victoria's Secret brand of feminism particularly harmful? Three main reasons. Firstly, it's elitist. This is for two reasons. Firstly, obviously the people in this collective are elite professionals. They're people who have become really famous actresses because they're really pretty and all that kind of stuff. They are not the average person that is relatable to normal women. And secondly, Victoria's Secret sells expensive, non-essential products, which means that they market and sell those products to people who are wealthy, largely Western. This is another thing that means this feminism is not reflective of what like regular feminism is. Secondly, under this point, this Victoria's Secret feminism will be incredibly hypersexualized. This is for the reason that obviously lingerie brands like Victoria's Secret essentially sell sex. That is why they have the kind of billboards that they do, why they pose their models the way that they do. But why is this harmful? For two main reasons. Firstly, it's incredibly exclusionary to the average person who does not meet the standards seen on this board. Like just because Priyanka Chopra is not white and she's not a size 0 doesn't mean she isn't insanely beautiful and unattainable to the average woman. This is incredibly harmful. Secondly, it does not deal with actual feminist issues, things like the pay gap, things like issues with sexual assault. What it deals with is like body image and really like vapid issues, as opposed to getting into the meat of feminism and actually dealing with like systemic discrimination. Thirdly, why is this feminism so bad? It's incredibly exclusionary because this is a Western company that is using Western beauty standards to decide who is part of this collective, who ought we include, who is beautiful. This obviously excludes people who do not meet these standards, who are a majority of the population. This is incredibly exclusionary, and it goes against the message of feminism, which is that like all women ought be equal, or all women ought be included in this. That is directly contradictory to the point of feminism. Okay, I'll take that POI before I move on.
So all your ideas about the feminist movement being elitist and pandering towards the ideals of the West, is this something that's uniquely caused by the Victoria's Secret movement or something that exists symmetrically?
So there's something that is specifically bad because of this the corporatization of it under Victoria's Secret. So I'm going to get into that now. So why is this bad for the feminist movement? Four main reasons. The first one of which will directly respond to that POI, which is that this is corporatized feminism. This is consumerism. This is using feminism to make money as opposed to just because you believe in it. This opens the movement up to criticisms that are very common in the status quo. Things like, you're only in it for the money. This is consumeristic in nature. This is incredibly harmful to the feminist movement and not something that exists like in the status quo with just Western feminism. It also supports these really damaging media narratives that feminism is vapid. It's about women like getting in their underwear and saying they feel really comfortable, as opposed to actually engaging with systemic issues. That's very harmful. Why is this bad for the feminist movement? Secondly, it's incredibly elite because it's rich Western people dictating what feminism is. Thirdly, it's incredibly out of touch. And fourthly, and perhaps very importantly, it is likely to turn off women who are from conservative backgrounds or do not feel comfortable dressing in the way that Victoria's Secret models dress. This means it's a very narrow definition of femininity, where femininity is only hypersexualized. It only has room for women who walk around in their underwear. It does not have room for women who are happy with more conservative ways of dressing. And it tells these women, you do not fit in feminism. You are not a feminist. You are not welcome here. You are not a part of this dialogue. Like, we do not conclude you in this. Okay, those are the reasons why it's bad for the feminist movement. And finally, I'm going to deal with why does this allow feminism, Victoria's Secret, to feminist wash all of their actions? Two main reasons. Firstly, it allows them to point to this one good thing they do to distract from the bad. So things like, you know, when criticisms come in to do with, well, you're using sweatshop labor, that's really harmful. Victoria's Secret can just say, well, but we're doing this great feminist thing where we donate to cancer, that's great. Also, it takes away from really serious accusations of sexual assault that have been leveled at their top executives. This is obviously a marketing movement to detract from that, as opposed to dealing with systemic sexism in the company. And secondly, and perhaps most importantly in this point, it says images are feminist, which allows no critique, because you cannot critique feminism or whatever. It says that these images come under the feminist banner. Therefore, you cannot critique it, or you are sexist. You are going against feminism if you dare critique this. This is incredibly harmful, because obviously sexualized images are something that ought to be critiqued if they are exploitative and if they make people feel uncomfortable. For those reasons, that this is an incredibly bad form of feminism that necessarily takes away from better forms of feminism, vote for OG.
Okay, here. Thank you very much to the Prime Minister for that speech. To start off the case for the opposition bench, I want to invite the Honorable Leader of the Opposition. Here.
yours in the chat, please. Panel, opening government can talk all they want about the divide between Western feminism and first wave feminism, but the point is, all of this existing divide already exists in the status quo. It isn't the establishment of the Victoria Collective isn't something that begins the entire divide of it in the first place. And even if that is the case, outside opposition, what outside opening government talks about is how outside opening government talks about is how it's listing out the issue without providing any real or fundamental solutions to it, right? So what are we going to prove to you in opening opposition? The first is that we're going to tell you why Victoria's Collective is better than the alternative. Second of all, why having figureheads for feminism is so important. And third of all, why social movements should work with capitalism and that the alternative is much worse. That is that those social movements doesn't receive the aid of those of corporates and instead going against those corporates. What it means is that they don't receive the immediate benefits of such as like funding that could possibly go towards women's education or in this case for women's cancer. So on this we think that the Victoria's Secret Collective is genuinely going to help people because they have an incentive for Victoria's Secret is the main incentive of them making the change from having Victoria's Secret angels over to the Victoria Collective is in recognition of the liberal trend and also an acknowledgement of the feminist movement. And also we think that as an extension that they don't want to appear tokenistic in the first place, noting how there is increased media spotlight on feminism. A few rebuttals before I go into my substantives. The first is on the issue of performative and tokenistic feminism. We think I'm going to address this issue within my arguments. Second of all, is why is the Victoria Collective better in propagating a feminist message? We think number one, it's because of the issue of efficacy. They claim that it is elitist and controlled by rich white men, noting how there are already ongoing pushes for corporate structures to be more transparent. And even if it does promote Western feminism, we think that it's okay because it changes, at the very least, it changes social narratives and opens up channels of discourse about feminism as a whole. It also sets a precedence for corporates to be more invested in a feminist cause. And if women on the ground get to benefit from it, we think that's very good enough. The next thing that OG talks about is how it turns away people from the feminist movement. Number one, it's quite unclear why the entire feminist movement is defined by the Victoria Collective and that alone. I think that there are other things that represent feminism as well, so I'm not sure to what extent their harms accrue. Second of all, there are still reasons why conservative women will want to support the feminist movement. Number one, it's because it is the movement that fights for their rights. And second of all, that it provides a sense of community. So noting how in the status quo, there has always been a divide between Western and first wave feminism simply because of the difference in what they advocate for. For example, for the Western feminists advocate for sexual liberation versus first wave feminists is advocating for self-determination for women. OG only lists out this issue, but they haven't provided any concrete solutions to it. I think it's a burden on them to say, since I've already listed out that issue, to provide a comprehensive solution to it. Second thing is, if OG is correct in saying that Victoria's Secret is profit incentivized, they will still be profit incentivized anyway, and that their media will still include even more sexist and wash imaging if that is the case. First argument over here. Why the Victoria Collective is going to benefit the feminist movement and women on the ground as a whole. We're going to prove to you why that the Victoria's Secret movement has Victoria's Secret has incentives to be accurate and reasons why it will be representative of marginalized people. The first is the public pressure to do so. Victoria's Secret is well known and have to be accountable to their consumers. For example, the Victoria's Secret show got cancelled. There's a decreasing trend in their popularity and less viewership too. Second of all, social movements. The reason why they deviated away from Victoria's Angels is because of them getting called out, because they are getting called out for promoting toxic beauty standards right now. They have to change They have to change, and the media scrutiny is still there. Third of all, resources, and they have the resources and the capacity to expand into different different fields and gain viewpoints of people. For example, things like consulting with POC women models, investing in programs to uplift and gain recognition for people. Second of all, is that Victoria's Secret is being held accountable. They're not going to be tokenistic because, number one, of the media scrutiny present. Second of all, that the Victoria Collective is comprised of high-profile figures from all fields. For example, Megan Rapinoe from sports, and as a result, they're going to receive a lot of media attention that are associated with those figures. But before I move on to the next argument, yes, CG.
Isn't it harder on your side for feminists to do things like boycott companies like Victoria's Secret in the first place, the point at which they're able to scapegoat accountability by pointing to this feminist thing that they have?
I think that in this case, number one, I've already told you why the corporation Victoria's Secret has an incentive to not mess up on women's rights and as to actively not mess up women's rights on the ground. Second of all, we think that if other corporations decide to mess up on women's rights, for example, underpay their female employees, I think that it's going to be particularly harmful to those other corporations, since Victoria's Secret is already being portrayed as a feminist movement. Noting how there are corporate standards and within the industry that they have competition, we think that if Victoria's Secret if such a powerful company as Victoria's Secret is already embracing feminism, that other companies will also have to will be held in comparison to them, and thus also need to improve on women's rights too. That means that there is a wider social change. Onto the second argument, why working with corporations is more beneficial than the alternative. i.e. the feminist movement actively calling out the Victoria Collective. I think this will answer the POI more. So what we're going to prove over here is that what Victoria's Secret can bring to the table is very much significant. Number one, in terms of corporate funding, that Victoria's Secret has profit incentive, but a global fund means that women in need get to reap immediate benefit from it. And second of all, is that it sets a precedence for other corporations to focus on women's rights. For example, some corporations in the status quo do not want to commit to women's rights because it is seen as a taboo thing for companies to engage in social causes. But right now, since they will be held in comparison to Victoria's Secret, and thus it sets a new precedence for corporations to embrace feminism. Second of all, why funding is so important for the feminist movement is that we think that the feminist movement caters for the upliftment of women. For example, in terms of mental health access, healthcare access, and the moment in which the feminist movement gets access to all of these fundings, like for example, for healthcare treatment for women with breast cancer, we think that all of this means that women get immediate benefit from it. Third of all, is that it opens up channels of discourse. Noting how Victoria's Secret already has a platform, already has as media resources and advertisements out there, we send a message that even people who are not traditionally beautiful can access empowerment and can be beautiful as well too. Second argument, why the negatives that Gav call out won't materialize in a significant manner. So even if it's tokenistic, at the very least, we get the immediate benefits of funding, we get more discourse on site opposition. Incredibly proud to oppose.
Hear, hear. Thank you very much to the leader of the opposition for that fine speech. And now to continue the case for the opening government, I want to invite the Honorable Deputy Prime Minister. Hear, hear.
Hey, sorry, just give me 1 second. All right. Sorry, I've lost something. All right, I gotta go. I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Before I get into the bulk of my speech, I just want to touch on 2 benefits that opening government is able to claim that just go completely uncontested and probably are enough to win us this debate on their own. Right, so the first one is on how this discredits the movement. Because Annabelle gives you 4 very good reasons why this discredits the broader movement. I'm not going to go over them. I'm not going to waste time because OG won't engage with them. The only response that we get to that is that they say, well, other things impact the feminist movement too, conceding that this will negatively impact the feminist movement, right? But first of all, even if other things would, that's still a concession that this has like some delta on the feminist movement and therefore it's a negative harm. Secondly, we think that Victoria's Secret is likely to have quite a large presence in the feminist movement for 2 reasons. First of all, the sexual connotations of Victoria's Secret mean that you draw people in because it's more intriguing. So people are likely to focus on Victoria's Secret more. And secondly, they're a large corporation who can pay for more influence and airtime, which means they're probably likely to have quite a large influence on the Victoria's Secret model. At that point, OG claims without contest the fact that this discredits the movement. The next thing we claim without contest is what Annabelle tells you in her PM speech, which is that this makes Victoria's Secret able to do way worse things like use sweatshops, but more significantly, things like push advertising that harms women, that pushes really negative body image stereotypes. We get this in a point from CG for some reason, as if Prime Minister hadn't just literally given you that analysis in her speech, right? The fact that Victoria's Secret, the biggest actor in this debate, can now push far more harmful things because they feminist wash is a benefit that OG uniquely gets to no contest. We think that's sufficient to carry this debate anyway, but now I'm going to get into the meat of the debate and do a little bit of rebuttal. 3 things. First of all, on why the feminist movement is basically the biggest issue is this feminism likely to be bad? And then I'm going to talk a little bit about what they say on funding. All right. So we give you a bunch of reasons why the feminism pushed by Victoria's Secret is likely to be particularly bad. We tell you, first of all, that this feminism is elitist, right? Because you have high profile professionals who are doing it, so they're likely to be the most elite from high SES backgrounds. And secondly, because it's an expensive product selling to people with a lot of money. Secondly, we tell you it's a particularly sexualized kind of feminism, which is harmful because it's exclusionary to people who don't meet those stereotypes of what makes someone attractive, particularly people who don't come from Western backgrounds, and because it doesn't engage with the real issues. Thirdly, we tell you that it's exclusionary because we're trying to push a particular brand image, particularly Western, that's likely to exclude people. And fourthly, we tell you that it's likely to have a very, very narrow definition of what a woman is. The only response we get from opening opposition here is to say that this is symmetrically true in, for instance, social movements who are pushing for feminism. Because note, as Annabelle tells you in her framing, the comparative here is there is some amount of social capital that the feminist movement has, right? And given that, you have to show not just that there are benefits to this feminism, but that this is more beneficial than the kind of feminism that it takes away. That's, for instance, like people from social movements being able to get more airtime. So they say it's symmetric. I don't think it is symmetrically as bad in social movements. 3 reasons social movements are likely to be better. First of all, there are active efforts within social movements to make them better. Secondly, given the crossover that we often have like with academia and the fact that intersectionality has become a particularly important doctrine for social movements, there are lots of incentives to try and cater for people who aren't mainstream, for people who don't come from Western backgrounds. The third thing is that the mainstream feminist movement and social movements overlaps with other mainstream progressive movements, things like Black Lives Matter, and that gives those social movements an incentive not to be exclusionary. Secondly, it's just not responsive to a lot of what Annabelle tells you, right? Because obviously, it's not symmetrically true that social movements have corporate incentives to sell to high SES women. It's not symmetrically true that social movements have financial incentives to push poor body image. It's not symmetrically true that they're corporations who will push a particular kind of corporate feminism. Like, they're just throwing out the word symmetric to try and wash it rather than engaging with our actual analysis. The next thing they tell you is, well, they don't want to be tokenistic. Right? Well, first of all, most people aren't like following this really deeply. So when they see advertising, they don't think, oh, that's tokenistic. They just think like they don't understand the full range of what Victoria's Secret is doing. So they don't understand that it's called tokenistic. Secondly, the corporate media doesn't have an incentive to call out corporations for being tokenistic for the reason that they want to keep on doing their own tokenistic things towards people from minority groups. The next thing they say is, well, they have the ability to be good. That's obviously irrelevant unless they have the incentive. The next thing they say is, well, they'll be good for money because otherwise consumers will boycott them. Once again, tremendously unresponsive. Who are the consumers that they're selling to? White, wealthy women from the West who will not boycott them for representing white, wealthy women from the West. I'll take CO. I'll take OO.
Who are the average people that are going to replace these multi-billion-dollar
Is someone going to say something?
house? Amanda.
Right, the next thing I'm going to respond to then is the stuff about the access to money, because that's a big point that they make. I don't know why that went off. That's a big point that they make. The first thing to note about access to money is that, well, yeah, this money probably isn't being used to push mainstream feminist causes. It's probably just being used to push feminist messaging for things that are in line, with the corporate message of these companies. Secondly, that's obviously getting more corporations involved isn't a benefit to them unless they prove that the corporations are beneficial. So that benefit is literally contingent on them winning the debate. And it's also worth noting that the more corporate funding just takes away from the message that is happening. We also just think that probably the amount of funding and political capital for feminist movements isn't changed that much for this, right? It's probably just sucking money away from other particularly large causes, and that money that is donated to these kinds of charities, probably, some of it is being used to fix whatever the problems they're purporting to solve are, but some of it is also probably just being used to push corporate messaging. So it's a tremendously inefficient kind of charity. The final thing to say here is that essentially what these guys have done, right, is that they've taken a group of diverse feminists and they've warehoused them inside this Victoria's Secret program. What that means is that this diverse group of feminists can no longer speak out on the issues that they want to. So they might want to critique Victoria's Secret on their body image issues. They might want to talk about how feminism is exclusionary, but Victoria's Secret stops them from doing that because they've been warehoused inside this program. They don't want to lose access to that program, that prestige, that money, those endorsements. And that means that if this is a good group of feminists, they can no longer be good, and that's a huge harm to the movement. Why does opening government win this debate? We establish why feminism is bad, right? Any benefit that closing government claims is going to have to be contingent on that feminism being bad. And for that reason, they cannot come above us because they rely on our mechanism. Secondly, we give you the most certain impact in the debate. The actor that's affected the most, Victoria's Secret, is likely, we show you why they will be more pernicious, and any other actor that's brought up in this debate will be less affected by Victoria's Secret. For that reason, that's a much bigger benefit. And also we give you the biggest impact, which is how this destroys the feminist movement overall. For that reason, very, very proud to affirm.
Here. Thank you very much to the Deputy Prime Minister for that speech. And to conclude the opening half of the exchange, I invite the Honorable Deputy Leader of Opposition. Here.
Hi. I'm just gonna. I can be heard. Okay, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Loud and clear.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good point. Mask. Before I start my speech, I just want to point out that I was defecating. So if I lose this final, I guess I have a reason for that, because I was defecating while this motion was released. So yeah. 3, 2, 1. OG is actually the imposter in this debate because they end up hurting the very people they wanted to protect. I'm going to talk about 3 things in this speech. 1, how Victoria's Secret as a body changes. 2, whether this will be representative and inclusive. Thirdly, I'm going to talk about how it changes perceptions on feminism and women's rights as a whole and the externalities of that on the movement. I just want to point out how their side just actually just dumps a bunch of harms here and don't actually engage in the comparative and say why things are going to be significantly better on their side, because presumably all the problems they talk about are the symptom of a wider problem, and they don't give you structural reasons as to why that wider problem gets resolved under their side. What the one thing that we said was, if you could change this one corporation to act in ways that are good, at least you could remove the harms of what they've talked about in terms of Western feminism, in terms of elitism. Therefore, things get significantly better under our side of the house. The first thing I want to point out here is how Victoria's Secret as a body changes. I think we're going to say here that the global fund will not be created unless the collective exists in the first place. And therefore, Victoria's Secret does not progress to become better. And therefore, all the harms we talk about why Victoria's Secret is likely to be bad is symmetric. The first thing I want to point out, if it's true that Victoria's Secret as a corporation is going to be a profit incentivized body, why won't that happen under the Gov side? Like, they don't have the fiat to assert that the profit incentive gets removed entirely. Presumably what we are saying here is, if that profit incentive is going to exist on both sides, the one way in which we make it better is through the creation of this collective. Means necessarily they'll be able to channel those profits into getting it through ways that are good, because they're able to say that the way in which we want to get our profits is through actively promoting good causes. Because think about the comparative here. It's about, if they say the angels are bad, presumably why won't they stick with the angels? Because that is the primary way in which they've gained profits throughout the years. So the comparative is, without the creation of this fund, you are likely to resort to things that are far worse, far more sexist, and because more of the harms they talk about, because it's far less inclusive in the types of women it represents. So therefore, you're more likely to just stick with the Victoria like angels, and therefore these people are just far more whitewashed. You don't have all of those things. This is for the reason that this is more likely to bring you profit, and we have the one way which we're able to get profit through this newly. The second thing to point out here, it's significantly easier to convince the higher management or shareholders that it's a cause worth to support, because this necessarily means that, well, we are able to convince that we're able to create a global fund for the reason that our company is then actually investing into these forms of things. Because if we're just going to dump money into like a movement somewhere else and just donate this as a one lump sum payment, obviously that's far harder to convince shareholders who are interested in profit. Now you're just changing the entire strategy of your company, which is far more persuasiveness, and we get more change in our house. The second thing that Gov says is, well, it creates complacency and creates a feminist wash. One, no, they've actively committed to that cause, and since they've poured significant amounts of resources into it, and now under public media attention for the reason they've committed themselves to that, they can't possibly be complacent, as the optics will hurt the company because they've actively backtracked on the stance they've set up for themselves. Obviously, companies already actively prevent the worst actors of harms there. But two, we said that the opposite actually happens, because without the creation of this fund, you don't have to commit to this. So it's unclear why significant backlash outside of the ways in which they create this fund. So if there's backlash against the OG side, I'm not sure why companies have to change, because they've never said that they were going to do this anyway. So it's unclear why you'll actually change that, because they don't necessarily have the burden to do so. But thirdly, and more importantly, we talk about the positive externalities in terms of the precedents it sets for other companies, because it actively sets a chain reaction when the largest lingerie company in the world does this. This is where athletes sharing their stories. This is where high-profile CEOs promoting this on LinkedIn. Networks mean more people are incentivized to do this as well. So even if you buy the worst case of our side, where Victoria's Secret themselves are uniquely bad at doing this, what we said was it leads to more companies doing this as well. And since the market is always going to be companies competing with each other, one company being bad at this means other companies also want to join this form of thing and actively represent them in ways that are good, so they're able to outcompete the one bad corporation that's doing this. So even if Victoria's Secret themselves is bad at doing this, other companies will probably do this in ways that are good. But I'm going to answer here and take the burden for ourselves as to why Victoria's Secret is good at this. One, because they have the capital to do so that feminist movements on the ground just don't have. Two, they have the unique position to change people's minds because of the large amounts of influence that they have, and they don't give me structural reasons to say why other companies will commit themselves to do it. The fact that Victoria's Secret does this is probably a good thing for our side, and the fact that the feminist movement can co-opt this ideal. But thirdly, the claim from OG is actually knifing themselves here, because what they said is, this is the response to the backlash. They don't actually care about the feminist movement. Then it's unclear as to why exactly they committed this in the first place. So presumably, if they're already someone who's really, really bad, then it's unclear why this backlash would change them to move from the Victoria Angels to the Victoria collective. So therefore, it shows that this backlash is somewhat effective in the first place, seeing as these forms of Victoria's Secret has committed to want to help women in the first place. Before that, I'll take OG.
You concede that Victoria's Secret is bad, but just call it symmetric under either side. But under your side, isn't that badness now coming to dominate feminist discourse and coming to dominate what the feminist movement seems?
Why that's true? Because it's unclear why this Victoria's Secret is going to dominate the entire way in which feminism works. Because your premise is that, well, just because Victoria's Secret now supports women, suddenly the entire feminist movement is going to be represented by Victoria's Secret and lingerie companies. Unclear why that's true. Because I think what actually happens here is many facets of feminism that are being represented. What we are saying is, for the POC people that never had a platform to do so, now they able to uniquely do it through the creation of this Victoria collective. The second clash here is whether it's representative and inclusive. They say that this feminism is elitist because of rich white men are doing this. Not only is this uncomparative, because it's like to happen on either side of the house, it's actually worse because of the domination of feminist ideals that are ways in which are really bad. So Western feminism is probably always going to prevail. But the one thing we're able to do is actually attack that Western feminism, because the one company that was previously propagating Western feminism is now going to change towards ways that are more inclusive towards POC people. The second thing that they say was, well, you hypersexualize people. Sexual liberation is already part of the Western feminist movement in many ways. Things like removing the taboo of self-pleasure. Not sure what the delta actually in this debate is, but I think there's still reasons why conservative women will want to support the feminist movement, because it is a movement that uniquely fought for the stuff that they wanted to do, and it provides a sense of community. So it's unclear why people will be completely turned off the movement. But I think there are other ways in which feminist movement already says things that are really might be controversial, because the OG's premise here is that you shouldn't do things that piss off someone else. You are probably going to piss off people no matter what strategy that you take. What we said was at least a trade-off here was that we were able to change people's minds about feminism. So it's unclear whether the entire feminist movement is defined by the Victoria collective as a whole. The final thing they say here is, well, you are warehoused by Victoria's Secret, and therefore why you can't speak up for the things that you want. What's the comparative under your side where POC people never had the initial platform to do this? What we are trying to say here is, it's still uniquely better to be able to gain the capital to have that and have their voices heard, when more people are able to see that this model actually existed, rather than comparative on their side of the house, where Victoria's Secret still wants to earn money and still wants to remain as a profit incentivized company to then get like white people on their side. So probably these people will still gain some form of influential position within the Victoria line of models. It's just that on our side, at least these people can be the POCs that they wanted to protect. The final thing here is about how it changes perceptions on women, of feminism and women's rights. One, people know this is a mainstream belief, so they'll be more comfortable promoting it. So therefore, even if only one company does this at first, more companies will actively do this because this is a normalized thing in society, so they won't receive social backlash for supporting this cause. But then the second thing that OG says is, well, it doesn't deal like issues of wage gap or systemic discrimination. It's unclear from the OG why these issues are any less important. But two, things like beauty and sexual standards are crucial ways in which women are valued, and therefore we change perceptions of how women are important. So this is a roadmap towards getting what they want. It's a crucial stepping stone towards the claims that they wanted to make. The final thing here, this claim from CG is that you can't actually backlash against this movement. One, we already told you how they are going to be committing towards this movement in the first place. Two, because you're actually doing things like consulting with people on the ground, consulting with feminist models here. This is something that's actively important. Panel, what we said was, even if this wasn't perfect, the other companies were going to do this too. And this is actively going to become a norm over time, and people were going to accept that even if Victoria's Secret wasn't perfect, it was a huge milestone in the ways in which we perceive feminism to be. Even if we could not win this debate on that, I'm very proud to stand on opening opposition.
You're here. Thank you very much to the Deputy Leader of Opposition for that fine speech, and that concludes the opening half of the exchange. And now to start with the extensions for both closing houses, let's first invite the Member of Government. Here.
Sorry, just to check, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, I'm sorry if I cut off halfway because the power's been tripping today. So if I do, just give me a couple minutes. All right. I'll take POIs verbally, preferably between 5 and 6. So I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. In my speech today, I'll be doing 3 things. First of all, I'll be explaining to you the problem coming out of the entire opening opposition side. Second of all, I'll be providing you the unique extensions coming out of closing government. And third of all, I'll be giving you wing analysis, telling you why we necessarily take the debate today. Few things first. I think side opening opposition's characterizations of how the world looks on their side is actually the characterization which we want to run on side closing government. What does this look like? Understand, I told you a few things. Number one, they explain to you when the point at which Victoria Collective actually sets up this collective, other companies are incentivized to opt in to do this as well, so that they're able to do things like get market share through the commercial value of this. I think this is a characterization which I'll use in my analysis later as well. Number two, they also tell you check and balances exist within the media now that prevents them from getting feminism wrong. 2 responses to this. Number one, understand the point at which they have an agency to scapegoat in this way. For example, the Victoria Collective is much less likely you're able to do things like perform boycotts, say things against Victoria's Secret in the first place, because now there's something to point to and say, look, we're doing something good. It's hard for you to say anything to them in the first place. But second of all, understand the point at which large corporations are able to use their political and economic capital to push the narrative of how feminism looks like to them. It's very difficult for the correct versions of feminism on the ground to actually be propagated and actually be seen by people on the ground. So that means the version of feminism that's seen by individuals on the ground is necessarily the one that's advertised in the first place. But third of all, right, they also tell you that because they have now shown they're actively committed to the cause, they cannot be complacent because the optics will harm them. I don't necessarily see how this is true, considering the points I'll bring up to you in my analysis later, right? But first of all, how do we extend and how do we differentiate ourselves from side open government? I'll tell you 2 things in my extension. First of all, why the funding is necessarily better on our side. Understand side opening government told you that yes, Victoria's Secret will funnel this money into marketing that wastes money, but we'll necessarily tell you in closing government how this funding actually helps the feminist movement better. Second of all, I'll explain to you why we better achieve feminism's objectives on our side of the debate today. I think that's enough for us to take the debate today. First of all, some characterization coming out of our side today. Understand the point at which people like Victoria's Secret want to commercialize feminism. The version of feminism they'll use, they would choose a version of feminism that is less controversial. That means picking things that are easy to commercialize, like body positivity. That means things that are more controversial on the spectrum, things like abortion, all these sorts of things are unlikely to be picked up by them because it's a large amount of dissent towards these things in the first place. I think the problem which happens with this, and this goes to what OO characterizes debate as, is the point at which other corporations want to opt in into this system as well. They will necessarily propagate the same commercializable versions of feminism. That means the things on the ground that actually affect women, things like abortion rights, which are too controversial for these people in the first place, would never get the platform which you want from them because they are washed out and swept under the rug by all these commercialized versions of feminism. This is a harm that comes up mutually exclusive outside causing government is extremely harming. Number two, understand the point at which people are only exposed to this marketable version of feminism. They build an implicit bias thinking that this is what feminism looks like. And this is the link that site opening government didn't provide you, because it means niche forms of feminism are forgotten, right? And why this is better on our side is for a few reasons. Number one, and understand the point at which companies such as Victoria's Collective, all that, are not donating towards feminist movements. It means that people on the ground are more incentivized to donate in the first place. What does that mean? Because the point at which people on the ground see that large bodies are already funding feminism, they don't feel like they have such a call to action to help these individuals in the first place, right? Because understand the point at which these large corporations actually help feminist movements, they will openly show you what they've done, right? They say, look, we donated how many millions of bucks to these people. That means people on the ground are less likely to support localized feminist movements. Why then is this harmful? Because understand the point at which individuals on the ground donate towards feminism movements, they're likely to donate towards localized feminist movements. Why this is necessarily important is because it means the support structures that feminist movements are supposed to provide to females are better achieved on our side of the debate today, because it means females on the ground are able to donate to groups that necessarily benefit them in the first place. I think this is something that's extremely beneficial coming out of our side today, right? But understand also what it means is that we call up this benefit coming outside opening government, right? Meaning that it's the funding on the ground would still be comparable to what the Victoria's Collective gives you in the first place, because we don't have marketing fees and all that. I think that's a benefit that we can eat as well. But third of all, right, why the discourse is necessarily better on our side. Understand, when discourse happens on our side of the debate today, even though we may concede and bite the bullet, it may be less than what happens on the side of opening opposition. At least the discourse is about the problems that happen to women on the ground. What this means is that individuals on the ground are able to talk and able to donate towards causes which openly talk about the problems they face. What this looks like, understand, side opening government did touch on this, but did not provide you the characterization analysis, which is important. I'll give it to you today. What this looks like is individuals on the ground, for example, in conservative societies, able to explain things like, for example, I can't drive, right? These sorts of things still happen on the ground. It's very important they're able to fund the movements which can support them for those sorts of problems. Why this doesn't happen in opposition is because the point at which all the talk about feminism is concentrated on what the commercial image looks like, all these other things are forgotten. That means support from people like the patriarchy, support from things like males in the first place are unlikely to come to these people on the ground because they only support those groups in the first place. All right, before I move on, any POIs? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, sure.
Sorry, CEO.
Obviously, Victoria's Secret is a beauty company, so it can't solve abortion. But when it comes to beauty standards, they are uniquely the one that's able to shift this. So even if we can't solve abortion, at least we solve beauty standards, which is the one thing you cannot shift at all because you don't do anything.
I think this is a very damaging point for your side of the case for a few reasons. Number one, understand Victoria's Secret never has the incentive to actually push what the real narrative of feminism is. This means the point at which they push things like, for example, body positivity and all that, it doesn't mean they necessarily stop things like the Victoria's Secret fashion show every year. What do you think this looks like for the image of feminism? I think it's an image of hypocrisy, right? That means it's much easier for individuals in the patriarchy or individuals who are against feminism in the first place to actively have backlash against you. Because now they can say, look, if this is what the imagery of feminism is look like, you're saying we shouldn't hypersexualize you, but at the same time, the main person that fights feminism is sexualizing women in the first place. I don't see how that necessarily achieves your objective in the first place. I think it's extremely harmful coming outside opening opposition. CG necessarily takes that down, right? What have I told you in my speech today? I've told you a few things. Number one, I've extended to you and explained to you why the point at which commercialization happens, other companies are likely to opt in as well. We took this from OO, but I've also explained to you why this commercialization is harmful, because each and every company must use the commercializable version of feminism in the first place. Second of all, I've explained to you why people have more incentive to donate, the point at which large corporations don't show such a large amount of support, and why the donations that they make will have much more effect and much more influence on how feminism plays out on the ground, because it means they can donate to those people that help them the most. Third of all, I've explained to you the way and told you why necessarily Victoria's Secret is the worst actor to actually propagate feminism in the first place. I don't think any of our points have been taken down by the opposition. Very, very proud to side with CG. Thank you.
You're here. Thank you very much, the member of government, for that speech. And now for the extensions from CO, let's invite the member of opposition. You're here.
Am I audible right now?
Yes, you are.
I'd like to welcome the chat from the chat. Welcome the point from chat. So I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Before moving on to our extensions, two things we'd like to point out about the whole or the other side on this debate. As for the side of OG and the CZ, they are only stakeholder that they can have an influence is a victory secret, right? No other companies such as Nike or those who are corporations who are engaged in the, for example, LGBT parade are irrelevant on this debate. This means that all the 99% of the stakeholder or the corporations who are currently engaged in this kind of feminist movement still exist on their side of the house. Therefore, the marginal delta caused by the victory secret is incredibly small on their side of the house. They never prove why victory secret have a pervasive influence in the feminist movement in the first place. This motion, whole of their argument is less irrelevant on their side of the house, and we told you what's relevant argument on the side of the house. But secondly, the OO just leave this debate by leaving out a deadlock of this debate. So if we take OZ and CZ at its best, the abortion or labor problem, this intensive problem is likely to be left behind on their side of the house. At this occasion, we need to compare the harm or which is more exclusive to our side of the house. We will crack down the OZ's and CZ's argument completely. At this occasion, we can have a conclusion that this motion should be denied. So the two extensions from our side of the house. The firstly, why the feminists still have a spectrum even in our side of the house and in both sides of the house, and why for the feminists that it's comparatively better. We'll crack down the OZ and the CZ at this point. But secondly, why this kind of victory secret, no other companies are likely to have a pervasive influence, especially in the teenagers who are very susceptible to this kind of feminism, and why these kind of people are likely to be better off on our side of the house. We'll make a concrete harm by this proposal. So moving on to our first extension, so that we think that a feminist movement can have a spectrum even if these kind of victory secret, the victory collective, some kind of send out some kind of information. Why is it? There are three reasons. The firstly, their kind of the media is diversified on the other side of scope. For example, even Fox News is conservative, also convey the information that is anti-West or that is not so very West biased. Given the media have some liberal media exists, the accessibility, the whole feminist are likely to exist. But secondly, the reason that the SNS are likely to exist in the echo chamber in the positive sense in this case, because so many people are likely to many majority of the youth people especially are follow the account that they are interested in. At this occasion, if they are interested in the labor account, for example, labor problem, they are likely to follow the feminist as well. Therefore, the scope of the feminist itself in each dimension are less likely to decrease, given that there is a core supporter as existing in each spectrum, right? At this occasion, given the SNS also has so many limitations in the scope, we think this kind of scope is limited. This assumption itself is not true. But thirdly, there's a social structure in the kind of cases, right? We think those who are interested in victory secret is kind of relatively middle or kind of rich class who afford to buy this kind of luxury in the first place. Therefore, most vulnerable citizens, the most really suffer from the patriarchy, cannot afford to this kind of byproduct, and they are likely to have a talk, have a conversation, and have a different conversation in the first place. Therefore, there's a kind of discourse itself is classified depending on the social structure. So at this occasion, we think this kind of structure likely exists. However, even if we take OZ's or CJ's case at its best, the feminism this kind of victory secret have a pervasive influence that is better from the two perspectives. The firstly, feminist connotation itself will increase, right? More people are familiar with that word that's comparatively better. But second, that there's especially teenagers have a positive connotation toward this kind of feminist movement, right? Given that they're very fond of this kind of model in the first place. So therefore, we think that situation is, therefore, at this occasion, the whole argument just irrelevant on this, right? The victory seeker have a little influence on that. So moving on to our extension. So sorry, please, later, please. So what is lacking in the OO is that they say that executive or the counterfactual might be bad because corporations are bad. We told you why the corporation is systematically bad compared to the feminist professional that are engaged, that belongs to this kind of victory collective. Why is it? Executive bad from the three reasons that are likely to dominate this kind of victory secret. Executive of this kind of victory secret is likely to be dominated by the man for three reasons. The firstly, men do not have to take maternity leave, and the secondly, they have a gender biases for those people, and they deprioritize female promotion. But thirdly, the male get the kind of benefit thanks to the current hierarchy. At this occasion, the man has a great incentive to perpetuate the executive structure dominated by man. So why this kind of thing is exactly bad, right? Three reasons for this. The firstly, they do not wear luxury in the very first place. Therefore, what they are prioritizing is how this kind of luxury looks like, whether this is very comfortable to wearing it or not. At this occasion, sexualization more likely to happen in our side of the house. But second reason here is that they are not so interested in kind of feminist movement, given that they don't know how sexual harassment comparatively compared with female. So why these kind of like female movements, feminist professionals are like still have a likely to incentive to these kind of make situation better, like less racist or less like discriminated, right? So yeah, before moving on, I'd like to accept the Aussie.
Do you think a company who makes money by making people feel bad about their bodies so they buy more products is comparatively more likely to fight against body image issues than the activists whose place they take?
Yeah, so we exactly tell you that we characterize what the feminist professional actually looks like, right? There are three reasons why the feminist professional likely to like pay attention to the like more like liberal and liberalization of female or female issues. For example, the first reason is they have a more exposure to liberal thoughts and other status, right? But secondly, they have some kind of even the like privileged female have a sexual trauma, right? So that's why some kind of actress like voice out in the Twitter that is called like the Me Too movement, right? But thirdly, they have a compassion to female co-workers, right? At this occasion, some female comparatively like suffering on their side of the house, that these kind of female professionals comparatively have better incentive to save those kind of people who are now suffering from the objectification of these kind of things. Why these kind of, how in our side of the house, those kind of people are likely to save those people? From the three ways, right? The firstly, racism are likely to decrease on our side of the house, right? In the past, comparatively, in the oftentimes model of Victoria's Secret is dominant man. However, now racial diversity is currently getting better. But secondly, thin culture are likely to get better, right? Because in the past, the Victoria's Secret is now like say that thin women just better, but now this kind of norm is being rectified thanks to the female professional. But thirdly, the less objectification of female likely to happen or stated why this kind of change is exclusively important, right? Because the female, like Victoria's Secret, have an exclusive publicity influence on the teenager, right? This is the Victoria's Secret locates the top of the hierarchy of the model, right? All the teenagers, especially those who really care about their appearances, pay attention to the Victoria's Secret model. At this occasion, this kind of model have a pervasive influence in the discourse around these kind of teenagers, or especially those who have a kind of appearances. We think we need to save those kind of people from being just rejection food so that they can be too thin, or hope this kind of like save this kind of very, very intense healthy harm. We are very happy to oppose this motion.
Here. Thank you very much, the member of opposition that defined speech. And now to some of the cases from both sides of the House. Let's first invite the GovClick. Here.
Sorry, hang on. Hello, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
I apologize if I have like Wi-Fi connections or like connection in general, problems in general. Sprout is a bit like problematic right now with connection. If I cut off any time, just like unmute and like tell my teammate, so my teammate can drop me a text. I go by he, him. I think I prefer POIs in chat. If I don't take 1 by 5, feel free to interrupt me. Okay, hang on, let me get my timer out. All right, and my paper is, my lord, connection is really bad. I'm so sorry. All right, cool. I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, I think the easiest reason why closing government takes this debate is A, we offer you a comparative, B, we tell you why opposition's comparative is literally the worst thing to happen, and C, our comparative just stands, right? Like most of the benefits, especially coming from closing opposition, are symmetrical when it comes to things like acceptance of like rights or like being liberal in general, right? The problem in today's debate is who identifies specifically, like who is the one who can represent feminism to the best extent? How well represented is that feminism under like things like the Victoria's Secret collection and all these things, right? I think it's really important to note that a lot of these extensions and a lot of these argumentation as to how this is true and why this is true came up from like closing government. I think I don't really need to talk sufficiently about OO today. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to weigh us out against CO because they're in direct contradiction with us. And then I'm going to weigh us out against OG because I think my member has already done a sufficiently good job in OO. Maybe I'll speak a bit about them later on. Okay, so let's start with CO, right? I think this will take me a very short time because note that most of the benefits that they bring to the table, i.e. liberation of women in the conservative countries, are all very symmetrical ideas in the first place. Because note that the comparative that Nathan specifically told you about is that rather than Victoria's Secret doing these things, we'd rather like actual feminist movements do these things and spread these ideologies to some extent, right? So these NGOs can also do these things and can also achieve these things. You have to prove to me specifically, maybe later in your op whip, why this is exclusive to Victoria's Secret collection in the first place, right? Because insofar as people are interested and want these things, they will search out for these things and get these benefits through NGOs, right? Like the problem is like how intrusive Victoria's Secret collections are, right? So all your ideas about giving people confidence is just like symmetrical. Also note that the second extension is that like corporations, I didn't really hear this because my connection cut off, but I'm going to assume that it's like corporations are run by men. I think this is a very convenient characterization for us because if corporations are run by men, how likely are they going to be, how correct are they going to be in representing feminism, and how correct are they going to be, and how valuable will that discourse that occurs around feminism happen in the first place, right? But let's say I think that's just like the most intuitive argument against that. So let me speak very shortly about things like opening opposition. When it comes to things like opening opposition, I think like other than the things that like my member has already specifically told you about and whatever opening government has said, I think it's also more important to note that the reason why Victoria's Secret collection in the first place takes away from current conversations is also that they integrate icons that can represent feminism or represent very niche forms of feminism in the first place, right? So this looks like they co-opt and like steal Priyanka Chopra, and she can't speak about feminist issues that are faced in India specifically because now she's liable to the company and she has to speak specifically on what the company talks about, right? That means the forms of discourse and the types of discourse and what she can say is in control by these companies. And insofar as we prove to you that companies are bad, then I think we very easily take this debate. So I think insofar as the case of opening opposition is predicated on these companies being like virtuous to some extent and being able to represent these people, I think it's just not true insofar as they take away from very important conversations that happen on the ground. So I think then this debate is just very vertical insofar as we have to weigh up between like government, the government benches, right? So no, I think it's very easy for us to outweigh OG simply by virtue of us giving to you a comparative, right? I think OG did a very good job in things like characterization, but I think they never exactly weighed specifically what those characterizations were. Note that most of these things came to you from people like Nathan. Nathan told you specifically what the characterizations and what the effects of specific things, of the things that they characterize would happen, right? So he told you A, he gave you characterization as to how the VSC, Note that like the main argument, especially coming from the first speaker, is that VSC, the Victoria's Secret collection is whitewashed and inaccessible, but they never tell us specifically why that is bad. We told you that this takes away from conversations on the ground. This looks like funding going into these things rather than funding going into people on the ground or NGOs on the ground that can have meaningful conversations. We also told you, this is a new point of characterization that didn't come out from OG, that Victoria's Secret collection is by virtue of it being liable to like the public, by virtue of it having a reputation that it has to protect, it's very unlikely to speak on very important and super controversial issues. They're more likely to speak out on very like surface level issues or issues that are just very generally accepted as something that the West can agree with, right? So I think this is really important. And before that, sure, opening opposition.
Yeah, so not only is your extension just rehashed OG but fancier, you don't ever say why social movements will be successful under your side, and it's not worth having the support of Victoria's Secret in your fight for your processes.
No, I think OG, what they did was they say that these things are, they just gave characterization on why like Victoria's Secret's collections, things were bad. We told you specifically how like movements on the ground have meaningful conversations insofar as they get the funding from the people who would otherwise donate to Victoria's Secret collection, A, and B, that like just like these people are more targeted towards like specific communities on the ground and are less liable to the public, right? I think all these things are things that we specifically told you about. It's exclusive to our extension and exclusive to like, and it's necessary to prove the benefits that we try to bring to you in today's debate. Note, so here's the two extensions and the weighing to this that Nathan brought to you, right? He told you A, that backlash will exist by virtue of this, there being like such a narrow form of feminism, and Victoria's Secret collection like perpetrates this form of feminism and only this. So note, the characterization, obviously in status quo, by virtue of Victoria's Secret collection having like more capital and whatnot, they're able to spread their ideals far further, right? That means that the point at which this becomes the general dominating narrative, the people who are biased, the people who are sexist in nature will fight against these things and associate this with the general perception of what feminism is. This looks like them, the point at which you say you want to have rights for women, or trying to say that you are a feminist, or claim to be a feminist, or subscribe to the feminist movement, you just ineffectively can't do anything because people will call you out and say, hey, the feminism is about this and it's bad and I don't want to listen to you, right? I think that's the simplest harm that Nathan brought to you that's exclusive to our side, and it's also very problematic. B, he also told you specifically how the interactions on the ground will be harmed insofar as people buy into specific and donate to specific forms of feminism, and only those. It's very hard for other forms of feminism to exist, niche forms of feminism to exist, that highlight problems with our system, and also just problems with different systems, with different governments from different cultures. The point at which people just can't, there is far too much power and capital in one form company, a company that's just ruins the narrative and gives false narratives in the first place. True feminism cannot exist because people just can't converse about this, because there's an overlying narrative that's very harmful for them. This is very unique to our side, not rebutted by CG, which is literally their duty. I think we win this debate.
Sure. Thank you very much to the government whip for that speech. And now to conclude this round as a whole, I want to invite the honorable opposition whip. Here.
I'm audible?
Yes, you are.
So I would like to have POIs on the chat, please. Or you can wave your hand. That's also fine. Okay. So I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. My speech is pretty simple. I'm going to weigh against each team and tell you why we won this debate. First, OG. OG had this premise that finite capital is going to be allocated to the social movement or to feminism in general, and we agree with that. However, they failed to prove how this social capital is going to move from Victoria's Secret to other average normal people that are able to thwart this movement in the first place. This is not going to happen. Like, the average woman does not have the social capital that Victoria's Secret has to make sure that they have the media attention that they do, or do the advertisement that they're able to do, right? All these things prove to you that the counterfactual of their side is not that average woman that is able to support things like abortion being able to suddenly speak out for feminism on a large scale, but rather, for example, maybe other corporations taking their place, or for example, these people like Taylor Swift or Miley Cyrus that is just as elitist and just as rich is going to take their place in itself. So for this reason alone, OG loses debate because they never showed us why the counterfactual is better in any way. Second, they told us that this is generally elitist, and we don't. But first of all, let's deny this in the get-go, right? First of all, you would say much of this movement, much of Victoria collection has not been that exclusive in the first place. For example, it has lots of people that are people of color, for example, and stuff like that, right? At least comparatively to other movements that might happen, at least these people have this kind of inclusivity, which is probably really better. But second, we also believe that they're outsourcing their money in a way that is beneficial, right? This means that they're not just using the money in the way that they want to, but they're actually funding charities or funding other outsourced forms of feminism that exist on the ground, which means that we don't necessarily buy into their entire case that these people are able to use the money and utilize it in a way that is only beneficial to the corporation itself in the first place. But also, I would like to negate the fact that conservative people are just going to buy out of feminism, which makes no sense. The point in which these people are probably going to be suffering from things like wage gaps is they're not going to just suddenly lose their feminist identity, or not care about feminism whatsoever. At the point at which these problems still would probably exist, and there will still probably be a big social push for this. I don't understand what the problem is. And then they told us that these companies are going to be able to scapegoat and able to deflect criticism. First of all, at the point in which some debaters that prep for 15 minutes is able to figure out the problems with these capitalists and identify the problems with this movement, I don't understand why most of the population would be able to understand why this is what problems this may have in the first place. But sadly, I don't think this was comparative either, at the point at which I don't understand how these companies can be held accountable on their side of the house any better than on our side of the house. At least these people are using these money in a good way that is able to help people in cancer and stuff like that, right? So next, CG. CG's case, I think, was mainly derivative of theology, but I'd like to expand on a few points. First of all, they told us that like these commercialized versions of feminism is not good and like it's going to be copied by a bunch of people. Again, I would like to say that like they never proved the counterfactual in any way. I believe this is just going to be replace another commercialized version of feminism. So I don't think this is necessarily a really important problem in this debate. But also because like lots of people like support feminism in different ways, and we proved to you, and like my honorable partner already proved to you, in really systemic reason as to why these people are not going to be able to like dominate the entire discourse of feminism. I don't understand what the problem really is. And then they told us this idea about how people are not going to donate to other charities but going to donate to Victoria's Secret. First of all, this is a weird premise because at the point in which like they think that like Victoria's Secret's funding for these kind of feminism is based on charities. No, most of their assets come from the $1 billion that they make selling lingerie or like hosting like fashion shows or whatever, right? This money does not come from the pockets of the poor people on the ground that are donating to feminism, but the people that are like rich and like white and they're like putting money into their pockets by like buying this kind of lingerie in the first place. So I don't think really this zero-sum game that they wanted to talk about really makes sense in the first place. But also I believe like if we take them and say that like these poor people are like even if we take them at their best, we don't think these poor people were able to like donate anyway because they don't really have that much social capital to donate for the feminist movement. So I don't understand why these people have a really marginal impact compared to the billions of dollars that Victoria's Secret was able to plug into the feminist movement. So I don't think this marginal increase of donation really matters in this debate. Sure, I'll take a POI from OG.
If a news program is looking to have a feminist on for discussion, do you think it's a good idea that that feminist comes from a company controlled by trying to push negative body image issues and selling to high SES white women for marketing purposes?
Okay, I'm going to tell you two things. I already told you that the counterfactual is probably going to be another rich white woman coming from like some probably similar background. And also, I don't understand why this would die out every other feminist movement at the point in which people still are suffering on the ground. So I think my responses weren't negated enough. And then lastly, why were we overweight over OO? So first of all, we believe that we're the only team in this we were the only team in this debate that actually broke down the backlash, broke down the clash of whether to what extent Victoria's Secret will dominate this ideas of feminism as a whole, right? We already told you systemic reasons as to why they won't be able to dominate the entire thing, and obviously there's going to be other forms of feminism, but we exclusively told you why these people have a really impactful effect on the beauty standards of this debate, right? We told you two things. First of all, because there's a model hierarchy in which Victoria's Secret models are basically seen to be the best career a model could have, many models look up to being this thing. Or for example, other model companies model their fashion shows according to what Victoria's Secret does, or Victoria's Secret basically sets the trends of what is fashionable and sets the trends of what is acceptable as beauty. We believe they have immense impact on the kind of images that these what the kind of images of what people perceive to be as beautiful, right? And then they told us that this body positivity is just going to work anyway. People are pushing for this. First of all, at the point in which we have all conceded that Victoria's Secret has this grand scale of advertisement that other people are not able to do, we believe that this means that necessarily on their side of the house there's always going to be white skinny people being pushed forward, and then these models and within these fashion shows there's always going to be white models within these big billboards that are never going to be helped because of the structural reason that we told you, right? White men always perpetuating these cycles, and them being able to deflect backlash because they have so much money. For these reasons, because because Victoria Collective was introduced, Victoria's Secret basically made a shift for the better. We believe there have been better regulations on the weight of a model within the Victoria's Secret model squad. Sorry, no time. And then there has also been shifts in the diversity of the people represented within these fashion industries, especially within Victoria's Secret runways, right? These things are very, very beneficial because one, obviously this will benefit people, models in general that are aspiring to be models, but also it has a really, really big impact on people teenagers that are modeling themselves or wanting to become someone like a Victoria's Secret model. This means that before, these girls may have become anorexic because they want to look like this skinny model, but now they have other versions of beauty that they can opt into. All these harms are the biggest, we believe this is the most biggest impact in this debate, helping these teenagers and helping these models, and for these reasons we're incredibly proud to oppose.
Hear, hear. Thank you very much to the opposition whip, and that concludes the debate as a whole. I invite all speakers to cross floor and shake hands on a fantastic grand finals. Right now, the judges will proceed to the breakout room to discuss and decide on the results. So we'll be back shortly for the results announcement. Thank you very much.